So let's get started. I'm Alan Stevenson. I'm a multiple myeloma patient. I'm the founder of the Multiple Myeloma Warrior Community and Chief Patient Advisor for Polygon Health. And patient advocacy has just become a passion for me. Recently, we had a situation with one of the members of the Multiple Myeloma Warrior Community group that were traveling outside of the United States, outside the continental US, and they got really sick. And the hospital was not prepared to take care of a multiple myeloma patient, and through all the treatments that we've gone through, and they basically didn't know what to do. And getting that person back to their hospital was going to cost over $40,000 for an air ambulance. And they weren't that far away. So it was because of that horrible situation that our member, Reese Oslinger, who is a travel professional, brought up the topic of travel insurance with me. And we discussed it. We felt like it was something that we should bring to the forefront. And he also arranged for our guest, who is an expert in the field with over 40 years of travel experience and 20 years of travel insurance experience, both in sales and the development of travel insurance plans. So with that, I'd like to introduce Carlos Cividanes, who is the Vice President of Business Strategy and Development for Travel Safe Insurance. So today, Carlos is going to talk about a topic that I think is just often out of mind when we're making travel arrangements. We're thinking about going on vacation. We're not thinking about bad things happening to us. And I think also a lot of times it's misunderstood that, of what travel insurance is. So Carlos, I'd like to thank you for being with us and for talking to us about this very important topic. I think that our conversation today could possibly change lives and maybe even save lives. So why don't we just dive right in, and you can just tell us what travel insurance is and what we need to consider, and let's start that conversation.
I appreciate it, Alan and Reese. Thank you for reaching out to me, bring me into this conversation. It's a struggle that we face all the time, Alan. One of the things is that Americans are blessed to have a system in which, in the US, you can walk into any hospital anywhere and receive treatment. That is not true once you leave the US. Okay. And as you stated, one of the reasons that I remained in travel insurance for as long as I have is because I know that there have been cases where we have either saved someone from financial ruin or actually saved their life. So it seems a little, corny, but I want to keep the discussion today focused predominantly on international, but we'll touch on some of the other things that are done. And the first thing I want to address is something that I often teach our travel professionals, because with Travel Safe, the majority of our products are offered through travel professionals. Yes, we have a website, travelsafe.com, and people can come there. I don't want to make this an advertisement for Travel Safe, but I want to clearly lay out who we are. So, one of the things that we find is that people just aren't aware. So we want to address the fact that it's not just insurance. The better term for it is travel protection. The reason being is that our plans and many of my competitors third-party travel protection, okay? That's one of the important distinctions that needs to be made since COVID. The media was very good about talking about travel insurance in general, but there are what we consider to be two types. That is offered by the supplier. That's the airline, cruise line, tour operator. Those plans tend to be very minimum. There are very, very rare cases, if any, where they actually have post-departure benefits that come anywhere near a third-party travel insurer, okay? So with the third-party travel insurance, there is assistance built in along with the benefits. And that assistance also is critical even to the situation that you mentioned about a member of yours who had a problem. If I recall correctly, that was in Puerto Rico. So it's outside the continental US, but it's not, it is a US territory, but even there, they ran into many complications. So, what does travel protection plans like the ones offered by us and others do that's different from regular medical? So, let's address some of the myths and misunderstandings that most people have. A, if someone asks me, what do you think credit cards do well? My answer is going to be baggage and nothing more than baggage. Because unless you're packing a black American Express Centurion card, what you're going to find is that the benefits are woefully inadequate. It's not just that says that. We know Dr. Google is not always right, but you can search for it and ask anyone in the State Department who's had a foreign posting, and they'll tell you the credit card coverage is not up to par. So with us, what you're getting are benefits that address multiple things. Here's what sets the American market apart. And unfortunately, even for groups like yours who have a known medical condition, the American market is the only market in the world that focuses more on trip cancellation than they do on medical. The rest of the world purchases travel protection for the medical benefits and medical evacuation because they're well aware that they don't have coverage. So we do.
I think that's a very good distinction. I would not have realized that.
Yeah, so we do trip cancellation. And trip cancellation, remember, when I'm speaking to your group, but it extends far beyond your group in the sense that if you were to purchase a policy, and this is any third-party travel insurance, what is covered as far as a family group is far more than what most people think. They tend to think of parents, children, grandchildren, that type of thing. But it extends far beyond that. In fact, it's easier to talk about who we don't cover than who we do, which is cousins, third generations, and pets. Okay? We can't cover pets because people leave a dying relative, they won't leave a pet. So the issue is that all of that comes into play when people are first planning their vacation and not realizing that someone who they're not even currently thinking about might develop a condition that could cause them to have a trip cancellation or trip interruption. So I just wanted to lay that out because we know that people tend to be focused on trip cancellation. But we wanted to have this discussion more about medical and medical evacuation. And here's how it's different, okay? If you open up your US passport and you look to things you should know before you travel abroad, they've had different terms depending on which version of the US passport you have. You'll see a warning from the State Department that clearly outlines that Medicare, Medicaid does not cover you when you're outside the US. Beyond that, you'll also notice that they warn that you should contact your medical provider and see if there is any coverage. What's often overlooked is the sentence that says, will they prepay? That is critical. This is where the horror stories come. This is the news stories where somebody had to call a celebrity because they were stuck in a foreign hospital and couldn't get out because they can't pay their medical bill. Okay? Outside the US, there are countries, numerous, not all, numerous, where they will deny you medical care or seize your passport if you're unable to provide payment up front. That's something that some travel insurance plans do. I can safely state that TravelSafe does. We have a condition that says we will authorize payment to secure admission, treatment, and release up to the full amount of the benefit. And our medical benefits, and I can only speak to ours, you can always look at others. Again, I don't want this to be an ad, but these are the things you need to look for. You need to look at what is the accident and sickness benefit. That's the medical benefit. All right. Is it primary? Is it secondary? But most importantly, the advance payment. All of our policies have that advance payment guarantee for covered hospitalization. That's what can save someone from having to max out a credit card or doing a GoFundMe and all these other things that we've all heard. It's unfortunately not uncommon. So this is where you have a critical difference with international medical. Okay. Some of the other things is that the moment the assistance company is brought in, let's say that they're contacted right then to put that guarantee. Now that person goes on a list, and there is, and almost all third party, in fact, I think all third party travel insurers do this daily. There will be a follow-up with that hospital regarding the treatment, because we want to determine, are they getting the adequate medical treatment? You don't have to depend on us being, good guys or doing the right thing. We're doing it out of sheer financial purposes. And that is that the longer it takes us to get you back home, the longer you're on our bill. So we have found over decades of experience that it's much cheaper to get someone expert medical attention as quickly as possible. So we will always look to get the best medical attention within the region. Now, let's say you're in a socialist country and people say, well, why would I need it? It's free. Okay, even in socialist countries, you're going to find that there are private hospitals and public hospitals, and the level of care can be dramatically different. An evacuation doesn't necessarily mean bringing you home. We don't automatically bring you home. There are lifestyle plans that you can purchase that do automatic evacuation, whether medically necessary or not, back to the US. That's not us. What we do is we will evacuate to whatever the appropriate, nearest and most appropriate medical care is. That could be a transfer from a public hospital to a private hospital. Okay. Also, if someone needs, like it sounds like the recent case, they need specialized care, and the medical facilities within that area are not capable of doing that, we move to evacuation. Now, to just give you a kind of idea of what the levels are of these benefits, medical on our cheapest is $35,000. Okay, that's per person. And our regular coverage is $100,000 per person. Medical evacuation is $1 million. That is our way of saying you're covered. Okay. Will we spend anywhere near that? I've never seen it. I've only had one case where it might have been a possibility. Travel agent on a transatlantic crossing, suspected appendicitis, Mayday call got put out, and a U.S. nuclear submarine responded. So
Wow.
it's crazy what can happen when you travel. All right. And again, we don't want to focus too much on the negatives. What we want to do is protect ourselves, just like we do with our home, our car, or other things, so that we're not having to focus on that or worry about it. So medical evacuation. Outside the US, it works differently, and this is where we really come into play. Now, if we're talking about just travel in general, and you notice I talked about the family coverage, this can also play a role, because if you are 2 days into your 10-day dream trip and you find out that a covered family member back home has had an issue and you need to rush back home, that's trip interruption. And we have benefits that provide that coverage too, to rush you back home. And if we don't spend up to the benefit level getting you back, then you have the extra is used for your prorated unused non-refundable days, so that hopefully later on, when things settle down, you can take that trip again. So travel protection in its current form, this is comprehensive travel protection, does multiple things. It's protecting the investment in your trip, but it's also protecting it not just for trip cancellation, but also should something happen during the trip and you have to interrupt. Now, we've got other things going. Anybody seen Newark in the news lately? So you've got airline meltdowns, you've got things like that. And many people are a bit confused. Our industry is just beginning to tackle the changes in the DOT rules. So the DOT has now stated that if an airline delays or cancels a flight and it's more than a 3 hour delay, they, quote, have to refund you. But this is really misunderstood because if you choose the alternate arrangements, there's no refund. And even if you choose the refund, they're refunding a ticket that you probably bought on a super sale months ago. And now you're going to have to go across the aisle to another airline and buy a full fare ticket, which is going to cost 2, 3, 5 times as much. So it's not really a solution, whereas travel protection has a solution. There are trip delay benefits, misconnection benefits that are designed to catch you up to your trip. So on the medical, which I think is absolutely the most important, okay, when you're traveling internationally, I won't let my family travel without it. My wife is probably the most hardcore advocate because she tells family members straight up, who do you think in the family is going to put a second mortgage on their house to bring you home? Spend the money, buy the travel protection. And travel protection tends to run somewhere between around 3% to 10%. If you're over 69, 70, it can run higher than 10%. But in general, it's going to run somewhere between 3 and 10% of trip cost. So it's not overly expensive. And there are ways to limit the cost. If you're really focused on the medical benefits, then you don't have to cover your full investment with many plans. And that means that your cost is going to come down. The medical benefits are always the same with TravelSafe. And again, I can only speak to our product specifically, that whether you're spending $30 or $3,000 on a policy, the medical benefits are the same for both policies. So this is where you have the big advantage. Now, people will often ask, well, okay, what if I don't want to be treated there? Well, you're making a choice. We are going to be doing it based on medical necessity. How is that determined? It's determined between the attending physician and the group of doctors and nurses that our assistance company has on staff. The other thing is evacuation. People think, well, if I have an evacuation coverage, then I'm good. Yeah, well, the truth is that being strapped on a board between two donkeys is technically an evacuation, as opposed to being lifted into a helicopter and taken to a hospital. So it depends on the plan. So you definitely want to have the plan that has solid coverage. And again, when an evacuation is done by our assistance company, I once was asked by the press how, it's determined how the evacuation is done, who does the evacuation. They sent me this matrix that just stunned me because they look at the company's reputation, the average age of their equipment, the experience of their pilots, or whatever type of equipment that's being used, because it isn't always air. Sometimes it's multiple. People aren't aware that some of the most expensive medical evacuation in the world is in Alaska, simply because it's remote, there are few providers, and it's usually multiple leg evacuation, meaning you got to get them, you got to take them by snowmobile or pickup or whatever, ambulance, get them to an airfield. Maybe that airfield's too small. They got to.
That's a great point, because in my part of the world, a lot of people around here go to Alaska on hunting trips or fishing trips or whatever it is, and they're in those remote areas. And I bet a lot of them don't think about what it would cost to get them out of there if there was a medical emergency.
Yeah, and again, even if your major medical covers, now Alaska is within the US, so it's not as big an issue about getting that treatment. But even if your major medical has coverage, what you'll find if you dig and you ask the right questions is that they won't prepay. You still have to go through the claims process. And if you're putting potentially thousands or tens of thousands of dollars on a credit card, you're counting on that claim being processed within 30 days. Because if it's not, you're the one that's going to bear the interest expense. That expense will never be refunded to you by any type of insurance coverage.
I saw a news story recently about somebody that was on a cruise and got sick. And the story was talking about how expensive it was.
It was a
And
$49,000 flu.
it was what?
Is it the $49,000 flu?
Yes, yes, that was it. $49,000. And if I remember right, they wouldn't let them off the ship until they paid it or something like that. I don't remember
Here's
exactly.
the thing. Let me be perfectly clear. If you're on a cruise ship, we can't do the advance payment because a cruise ship does not have a hospital. You
Right.
have not been hospitalized, and the cruise ships will demand that you pay up. But here's the difference. If that gentleman and he had a travel protection plan, but I think it capped out at 25,000. And most likely, I can't state for certain, it's conjecture. He probably bought it through the cruise line or probably bought it online without the use of someone like Reese, who, and again, travel professionals, they're not insurance agents, and they're not going to offer what we have or what anybody else has as an insurance agent. What they're offering is based on their travel experience. But the truth is that you can have an insurance agent who has multiple licensing, has all this licensing, and if you ask them a question, they're going to read to you out of the coverage versus someone who can say, I'm not an insurance expert, but in my travel experience, I've had clients who have had these issues, and this is how they were addressed, or this is how they weren't addressed based on what they had or didn't have. So that's where we do depend. And for our case, travel professionals like Reese can offer some things that we do not offer online, even from our website. So there are plans that you won't see as a consumer, you can only see through a travel professional.
That's great. That's great. One of our members, I've been posting about this meeting on our group, and one of our members posted on there and made a comment, said that she broke her hip while she was on a trip, and they had to get her back to the US. I think the total thing was like $800,000, and it was all covered by her travel insurance.
Wow.
And I'll also bring up another point. This is even more important for people that have health issues like we do.
So
I mean, and here's not only are we more susceptible to things happening, but I'll give a perfect example. Other countries usually get these treatments later than we do. So, like CAR T therapy is one of the newer therapies and it's been available for several years in the US. So, a lot of people have gone through CAR T therapy. Well, if we travel outside of the United States and we've gone through CAR T therapy and we get sick and end up in a hospital somewhere outside of the US, they don't know what to do with us. They don't know about the special circumstances after we've been through those treatments. They're not accustomed to handling that.
It's a great point, Alan. And I do want to address it because likely amongst your members is also the question of, can I be covered or am I going to be excluded because I have what I consider to be a pre-existing condition? So the travel protection industry, long before there was the Affordable Care Act, was basically the first line of insurance that included accident and health that covered pre-existing medical conditions. And the way that we cover it, and it does vary some between companies, there is what's called a time-sensitive benefit. And the vast majority of companies start their time-sensitive benefit from the time that you make the first payment for your trip. Okay? So the very first payment, even if it's a fully refundable deposit, that's what's going to start the clock. With us, you want to buy your policy in any amount within 21 days of that first payment. If you do that, and at the time you purchase the policy, you are considered fit to travel, then any pre-existing medical condition you have will be covered. And that is called the pre-existing medical condition exclusion waiver. Um, it's a lot of words. I like to say that in the insurance industry, if we say no twice, we mean yes. So policies are written to exclude pre-existing conditions, but this waives that exclusion.
Right.
So, but how we see pre-existing medical conditions is also different. Let's say that circumstances ended up that someone didn't know and now they found out about travel protection, but it's been more than 21 days, but they would like to get protection. The way we define a pre-existing medical condition is any medical condition that has been active or undergone a change within 60 days prior to the purchase of the policy. Okay, so if you have a medical condition that is controlled through a medication, and during the 60 days prior to the purchase of the policy, you had no change in medication, you had no documented change to your condition, then your condition is not considered pre-existing to us. Now, claim-wise, it's always easier to just get the waiver. Buy within the 21 days. Let's say that you're going on a cruise. They ran a super special. It's not sailing from somewhere where you live, so you still have to buy airline tickets. And you think, well, I'm going to wait till I get my airline tickets and then I'll cover it and then I'll insure it all. No, you want to cover your known costs within the 21 days. Okay, even if it's just a deposit. And then you want to increase that later on when you have those other costs and now you want to protect those. Now, I can only speak again in relation to Travel Safe because other companies might treat it the same way as us, but they might not. The pre-existing medical condition exclusion waiver, it can be only at the time of deposit, 7 days, 14 days, 21 days. Okay. And the look back period, which was that 60 days I was talking about, that can be 60, 90, or 180 days. So again, these are the things you want to look at. I often tell people that everybody who purchases insurance does it backwards. Because if you ask them, why did you get that insurance? They're going to say, well, I got it because it covers everything but. And every policy ever written starts out with, we don't cover anything except for. So the first thing you should do is not go to what's covered, go to the section of what's not covered. Go to the exclusions first, because that's where the bad surprises are.
That's great advice. I hope everybody makes note of that.
Yeah, and again, we would love to help people, and whether it's us or someone else, or even that supplier program, having something in place is better than not having anything. Because and this again speaks specifically to international travel, but when you look at benefits like misconnection, travel delay, those things, they can apply to domestic travel as well. Also, the other thing is that in today's reality, people have stunning amounts of, even with major medical, you may have a limit that you have to hit that's quite extensive before they'll
deductibles, out of pocket, co-pays, yes, it can add up a lot.
Out-of-pocket costs, whether it be co-pays don't tend to be so bad, but there are other limitations. And anything that's not covered, whether it's primary or secondary medical, that travel protection plan is going to step in and allow you to claim those uncovered amounts against that policy.
Right.
And lastly, most people look for primary medical. Okay. Primary medical definitely has its benefits. You only have to deal with one company. You only have to go through one claim process. But I will tell you that secondary medical does have its place. If there is no primary plan in place, secondary becomes primary. So if you have no international medical, then that secondary plan is your primary plan. And anyone over 65 who doesn't have a supplemental plan to Medicare that has international coverage, they don't have any international coverage. So even that secondary one is going to come into play. And the reason I wanted to bring that up is because, again, above 65, travel protection is priced both on age and trip cost. Okay, so the older you are, yes, the more it costs. And that's why sometimes the secondary plans above 65 are better priced. They're more attractively priced. And you don't have to worry that you're leaving something off because it's not primary, because in most cases, that secondary will now become primary.
That is fantastic information. So if in my understanding is correct that if you're in some country or if you're on a cruise ship or whatever, and, and you've got to have care and you can't get the care in that country, then
We're
the
going to
transportation cost is going to be covered. And the other thing that I'll say that I never really thought about in that situation that made me aware was how much time it was taking and how much stress it was on this individual trying to make arrangements for all of this.
well, and let me add
And
to that. Let me add to that. Here's the thing. If you had to do an evacuation today at home and you couldn't use 911, would you know where to even start? If you start Googling, right, and you start going about that, what are you going to get? You're going to get providers who you have no idea how competent they are. And two,
right,
you're going to be, they're going to charge you their top amount. So our assistance company has contacts worldwide. We're not a PPO, it's not an HMO, anything like that. But what they are going to do is try to use known providers because of the level of service, right? And because also the cost. They
right,
already know what the costs are. They're going to try and keep it within your benefit so that you don't suffer, that cost over and above what our coverage is. And again, our coverages tend to be high, and there are others that have even higher amounts. But
right,
I strongly recommend it because people do not think about it. And the other thing is, think about it beyond your group. Your group has relatives who are traveling.
right.
If those relatives are traveling and you're not, but you have a medical issue and they need to get back to you, that's also covered when they purchase a product like this.
Understood. And I think that's important because a lot of times, it's multiple myeloma generally hits us when we're a little older um, but a lot of times our kids will want to travel and we want them to go live their life, but they're afraid to leave us or make arrangements even. And I think that's even the bigger thing is a more common thing is, well, I don't want to schedule a vacation because dad might get sick and I might need to get back home and have to fill this out or have to get back home and cancel my trip and all that money's gone. And I do want to add that we do have this set up where if anybody has any questions, they can put it in the chat. I know we're probably going to wrap up real quick, but I am looking at that. So if you have any questions, you can type that in the chat box. And then Reese, you've been in the industry a very long time. Do you have some stories that you can share with us from people that you've seen and situations that you've seen?
Unfortunately, well, good and bad. Good news is not a lot in my 20 plus years, thank God. But there are some stories that come to mind. One that comes to mind was a family that went on a trip. I think it was in the Dominican Republic, if I'm not mistaken. They went with their young daughter at the time. Dad and daughter went out on a rafting excursion or a little canoe or whatnot, and they were actually hit by a speedboat and knocked
Oh
over
my
into the
gosh.
water. The daughter's leg was cut by the propeller on the boat. Luckily, thank God, it wasn't a major, but it tore some tendons. She had to be rushed to a hospital. the care in the Dominican, of course, was not great. So she was airlifted back to Children's Hospital in Philadelphia, if I remember. This happened quite a long time ago, so I might not remember all the details, but that's just an example of things you don't think of. I mean, who would think they're going to go on a trip to a resort in the Dominican and get knocked into the water by a speedboat and have an accident? But that, uh, another person, another client, just simple like fell on a tour. They were walking, they tripped and broke their ankle. I mean, they just tripped over a rock or whatnot, and another person was playing golf and injured themselves playing golf, also twisted or broke their ankle playing golf in Ireland. So these are just
Right.
things that you don't think of, but they happen, unfortunately. Luckily, not hundreds of cases, but they do happen. And I always tell my clients, please consider. I mean, I can't force anyone to do anything, of course, but I always recommend travel insurance. I tell them what the main coverages are. Like Carlos said, I'm not a travel insurance registered agent, so I can't go into every little detail of every little policy, but I can recommend, and then I tell them to call the travel insurance company and speak to the authorized people. I will answer every little question. For instance, I'm sure some of our guests online now are going to say, well, I'm not sure. I don't understand. I have multiple myeloma. If I go on a trip and I get sick, is that going to be covered? And that would be something that I would say, Carlos went over it, but talk to the insurance company, tell them your situation, and they'll tell you how something like that. And Carlos mentioned that there is no reason why, even though we have, of course, buy the insurance within a certain time, then you have covered. But even if you don't buy it within that time, it could still be a covered thing, even though we have an illness, but we're not. If we're going along our lives, like hopefully most of us are living our lives now under regular routine maintenance, like myself, I can speak for myself. If I'm going on a trip, which I am at the end of the month, I'm going to have insurance. I have myeloma for many years, but my condition is under control at the moment. So, in God forbid something happens, it's going to be treated as something where I would still be covered because I wasn't. And they look back to 60, 90 days or whatever, I had
Right.
no difference in my
Everything's
condition.
stable. Yeah.
And that's
And
only if you don't get it through the time benefit period,
Right.
with those 21 days, because 21 days is an automatic exclusion. Again, the only thing that those waivers can't cover is if you are not fit to travel on the day you purchase the policy. And if there's any question, and who would not be fit to travel? Someone who
right.
is undergoing a treatment, okay, and planning a trip to celebrate the end of the treatment. We salute the wanting to take the trip, but if you're undergoing a treatment, even the doctors cannot state that that treatment with absolute certainty will end when it's supposed to or work the
Right.
way it's supposed to. So at that point, you're not fit to travel. And if there's any
Understand.
question at all, you simply schedule with your physician and say, look, I'm planning on taking this trip. If I were to tell you I wanted to leave tomorrow, would you be okay with me taking this trip? If so, would you put it in writing? That's physically fit to travel.
Understood. Understood. Well, I think it's just such an important topic, especially for our community, for many reasons. Number one, we're immunocompromised. Number two, a lot of us have bone damage and broken legs, broken bones. It can happen a little bit easier with us than it can somebody else. If you're in Spain and you're walking down some steps over there, and which I've never been, but I understand there's a lot of them, and in some of those cities, and you fall down the steps, well, now you got a problem. And
Trips, trips and
then
falls.
the third thing is that we may have, some illness or whatever. We get sick and we just can't go on our trip, and we're going to have to cancel our trip. And then the last thing is something that you brought up, Carlos, and that is we may have family that we want to see them living their lives and going on trips and taking their kids and going and having fun, but they're afraid to do that because they may need to cancel if we have a problem. And this, I think, would allow them some peace of mind to say, okay, I can go ahead and book my trip to wherever it is. And then if worst case scenario, I need to cancel that trip or I need to get back home, I can.
Absolutely. We can provide solutions for many of those situations. What you want to do is just address them specifically. I always recommend working through a travel professional if you're using a travel professional. But then, because they can direct you to the most appropriate plan in their travel experience, and then you can ask the specific questions of us directly.
Right. Well, I think that's all that I have. Is there anything else that you think we need to know? I mean, I think we've covered it pretty well.
Yeah, there's always new stuff. There's always once things settle in and people think about it, they tend to come up with some really wild scenarios. Um, and oftentimes it's still just kind of coming back to some basics as to whether we can or can't. The basics of insurance are as long as something is unknown, it can still be insured. The moment it becomes known, it is much more difficult to insure. Although
Well,
we are one of the rare industries, we do have what's called cancel for any reason. And that cancel for any reason allows you to cancel a trip literally for any reason. It has to be the person who's holding the policy that's canceling, not the supplier. But we once paid a claim for someone who had a dream they shouldn't go on the trip. So it is any reason, but you're going to take a hit. It usually costs more, significantly more, about 50% more, and you only get 75% of your loss back. But there are many things that we can do. Talk to you, either your travel professional or directly to us or another travel insurer.
you'll get a laugh out of this. I was at a doctor's office and we were waiting in the waiting area, and somebody started complaining that we were waiting too long. And I said, well, at least we're not riding a donkey through the jungle for 3 days to get to a witch doctor that's going to treat us with spit and moss. And
Yes.
they kind of laughed. And the thing is, though, that if we don't take care of these things when we're making our travel arrangements, we might end up riding a donkey through the jungle for 3 days to get to that witch doctor. So, I think it's something that we really, really should address, because I will tell you, at least several times a week in our group of 10,000 people, somebody will ask the question, can we travel with multiple myeloma? And the answer is yes, but you need to know there's some risks there, and you got to be smart about this. So, Carlos, thank you so much for your time and the education you've given us on this very important topic. Reese, thank you so much for contacting me about this and thinking about our community. And, I think this has been an excellent presentation and just such an important topic. And like I said, I would have been one of those guilty ones that probably would have set up a trip and just not even thought about it. And I'm a financial advisor, okay? So I normally think about these things, but that's not my area of expertise. So thank you both very, very much.
Well, thank you, Alan. If anyone has questions after the fact and they want to reach out to myself or call us, feel free. I'm always here to answer any questions. People know how to reach me. I'm usually in the forum and our Facebook group, but Alan has my contact. If anyone reaches out and has a question, then I can get in touch with Carlos if anyone has any questions for Carlos. So we're here to help.
Yeah.
All right. Sounds great.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank y'all very much, and let's close it down. And if anybody thinks of anything afterwards, just let me know.
Appreciate it, and I'm very glad to see that a group like this exists, because absolutely, you guys should be getting along with your lives. It's there's no reason, with the proper precautions and proper preparation, you can't do whatever it is you want to do.
Well, thank you very much. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.